I am co-owner of I Love Zero with my husband. One of the ways we try to raise awareness of menopause is we have evenings in the shop that have come about through customers asking us for advice and support about the menopause. So we decided we would do an evening in the shop solely based on menopause, about how diet, mindset, supplements, exercise can all help alleviate and stop and support women who are going through the menopause.
I'm a registered nurse. I work in the community and have been in healthcare for almost 20 years in one degree or another. I also have a specialist interest in menopause and the midlife transition, which is experienced by women all over the UK. I run what's called the Menopausal Nurse blog and Instagram page, and I also support women on a one-to-one basis in groups or in community settings or community or corporate settings. I do a lot of talks for women who are in business, and I use social media platforms quite a lot. I'm a member of the Queen's Nursing Institute, the RCN, and the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and also the British Menopause Society. And I tend to follow the guidelines set out by NICE in order to ensure my practice is evidence-based and always current. I also draw on the experience of many of the professionals within my community, which enables me to offer a completely holistic package to the patients and the women that I see privately.
So menopause is that time in the life for a woman when basically she's kind of past childbearing age. Now, if it's naturally occurring, then that's often kind of between sort of 40s, and it can vary for different women, but it can be from 40s onward. Obviously, some women through medical reasons go through earlier menopause, but generally it's when the estrogen levels start to drop and a woman stops ovulating, as biologically her body is seeing that that's now past her time for childbearing age.
Premenopause is the entire reproductive period prior to menopause. So it's from the first episode of menstruation to the very last menstrual period in a woman's life. So the perimenopause begins with the first biological or clinical symptom on the approach to menopause. So the very first time you, as a woman, would notice there is a clinical symptom or a biological change within your body, that's when perimenopause begins. Now, postmenopause is defined as the time following that last menstrual period and is determined after the 12-month absence of menstruation. So you've been perimenopausal for however many years that be. It could be up to, a year to 10 years. It could be any length of time. And once you have had 12 months of consecutively free from menstruation, that is when your postmenopause starts. So it's like the next day, you can then define it as postmenopausal. It doesn't mean you necessarily don't have symptoms, because women can have them for the rest of their life. They may not, but it is that point of time when it has stopped completely after from 12 for 12 consecutive months. But there's early menopause, which is the onset of menopause of women between the ages of 40 and 45 years of age. And there's premature ovarian insufficiency is the onset of menopause prior to the age of 40. So early is 40 to 45 years of age. Premature ovarian insufficiency is the onset of menopause prior to that age of 40. You can then have what's called induced or surgical menopause, which is the cessation of menstruation due to a surgical removal of both ovaries, and that pretty much is immediate.
I think women first maybe start to notice something is happening or changing with their body. Obviously there's the periods, which might start to either get a bit heavier or more irregular. Some will notice like the hot flushes or hot flashes, as sometimes people call them. Night sweats can be something. Anxiety, often women talk about just feeling really anxious for no good reason, which can also then affect sleep patterns, and that's a little bit of a catch-22 because they're waking up in the early hours of the morning, maybe from hot flushes, maybe from just being very anxious. That then causes irregular sleep and bits of insomnia, which then can exacerbate those feelings of emotional stress and anxiety. Some describe mood swings. So it's a little bit like the flip side of adolescence, really, when kind of skin changes, hair changes, mood changes. And like I say, that varies from woman to woman. Some women can sail through it. It isn't a given that you're going to display all those symptoms. Some women seem to suffer some areas of that more than others. And some people have really quite a debilitating time going through menopause. It would be a genetically female woman, or if they've had hormonal changes. And again, like I say, it can vary, but naturally occurring menopause generally happens kind of from like late 30s, early 40s. You'd maybe start entering into perimenopause. And it can go on for some women, especially if they're having HRT, which can push on or kind of delay menopause, which means when they stop the HRT, then they'll still be getting menopausal symptoms. And some of the women in our shop are coming in from like mid-30s thinking they're starting to get sort of perimenopause symptoms. And I have some ladies in their 60s who are still having some hot flushes or night sweats. So menopause can last anything between a few years to 10 or more. And again, symptoms can vary and intensity of symptoms can vary from woman to woman. So there is no kind of one size fits all. And it isn't to say if somebody's been going through menopause from 30s to 60s that's kind of quite rare. So it's just finding it out for yourself individually, but it would be a female who would go through menopause.
There's 51% of the population are female. That's an awful lot of women, and whether they identify as female or not, they will go through the transition to menopause and experience those symptoms in varying degrees. Now, the symptoms and the time frame in which a woman will experience menopause varies depending on age, circumstances already present in their life, pre-existing medical conditions, emotional and physical health, presence of any marriage difficulties, for instance, all contribute. Ages of children and even the economic factors can really add to how a woman experiences menopause and when, of course, she experiences it. So the lack of social support can also determine the severity of symptoms. Now, things like vaginal dryness, burning sensation or itching, combined with urinary symptoms such as frequency of needing to go to the toilet, difficulty in voiding your bladder, suffering from recurrent infections, these all contribute to a lack of libido, which adversely affects relationships. Women often feel that they're not able to juggle family life, simple tasks become overwhelming, and children often pick up on the ripple effect of mum feeling, behaving or acting differently. So every single woman at some point will experience something. It may not feel overwhelming to some, and it may be completely and utterly stifling for others. It's very difficult to know, but there are so many deciding factors and determinations that will make up when and how you experience menopause.
But I know from talking to women that have come on our evenings or come into the shop, if they're experiencing mood swings, then obviously that can put a strain on relationships. If they're kind of having like temper flare-ups, getting argumentative, finding low tolerance levels of their children, of their partner. So lots of arguments can ensue. Often in menopause, biologically, because your body is saying you don't need to have children anymore, that does have an impact in kind of sexual relationships where women maybe just, their body's almost not closing down on them, but kind of saying that we don't need to have sex anymore because we don't need to procreate. And that can be hard sometimes, of trying to find the ways to still be sexual or be romantic. And there's some actual physiological changes that take place that can make sexual intercourse uncomfortable or painful for some women. So again, it's just having that communication to explain what's going on, finding ways and alternatives to building that intimacy in a relationship, and building that hopefully that they can still maintain some sort of sexual relationship, and understanding for themselves what they're going through. And for children it can be really hard because suddenly their mum's kind of flying off the handle at them, or being a bit erratic, or parents are arguing. So it can, family-wise, it can have, a really big impact for some women.
There is a number of single women also. So many women are single during or post menopause, whether they've always been single, whether it's a result of relationship or marriage breakups. And there's the number of single women that would like to pursue a relationship or casual dating of some sort may feel that they're actually unable to because of the sudden and random onset of symptoms. And this leads to lack of self-esteem and the confidence to go out and pursue relationships or look to date. Very easy to just shy away from all of that because you don't know how your symptoms are going to be from one day to the next quite often. There's around, I think it's 3.5 million women in the workplace who are affected by a natural menopause. That's not to mention those that are prematurely experiencing it. There's many who may have premature ovarian insufficiency that remains undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. We hear plenty of stories where women are saying that their GP has told them that they're too young to be going through the menopause, or actually they don't feel that they would be going through it, so are not actually identifying as such. So it's very difficult to put an actual statistic figure, correct figure on that. But it's also the undiagnosed and misdiagnosed cases do render those figures inaccurate. There's similarly a difficulty in estimating how many are from the LGBTQ plus community because of lack of evidence. Not everyone is comfortable or even willing to share their sexuality or indeed acknowledge symptoms openly. But there's about 500,000 plus, so rising numbers of trans people under 40. So we can clearly see that there is a need for awareness, especially for those who are or were identified as female at birth, and they may still go through menopause naturally, but may not identify as female at this point. So it is a bit tricky to try and make sure that we are inclusive of every group. In fact, every single group, going no matter on age or ethnicity or sexual orientation. And moving forward with an inclusive menopause mindset is understanding the needs of the LGBTQ is paramount because they still experience the menopause transition, but they will also, in addition, have a completely different set of issues and barriers to overcome practically and emotionally, and because they're not openly expressing their identity. So you can imagine how hard it must be for somebody who doesn't identify as a woman, having to go through a process that is that identifies you as a woman, that only women go through. It must be the most emotionally difficult stage of life. There are a number of women under 40 who will be experiencing premature ovarian insufficiency, but there are a huge number of women who haven't identified it themselves, any of the symptoms that they could be going through. GPs who will tell them that they're actually not going through it because they're too young. So it really takes an awful lot of unpicking. So there isn't a specific statistic that I would be prepared to give you that is accurate. I can say 51% of the population is female. I can tell you there are 3.5 million women in the workplace. I can't tell you exactly how many because I don't believe that those figures are necessarily accurate. Well, it's a work in progress, but there's so much awareness now that it's becoming easier to put a figure on these. But I cannot imagine how many people are out there who don't identify as female, who are also under 40, who may also be going through premature ovarian insufficiency. It's quite something.
For me, I think the awareness is quite liberating for a lot of women because from the evenings that we've had in the shop, the message that's come across is that suddenly women don't feel like they're on their own, or that they're going mad. Some of them really feel like they're losing the plot a little bit, or that their anxiety levels are completely irrational. So actually being able to say that's quite normal, and even actually because estrogen levels are dropping in the body, when some women are going, oh, actually, that's why my hips are aching or my shoulders are aching, it's not just old age or an injury, and finding that there's a reason maybe why they're feeling how they're feeling, and there are potentially things they can do to support themselves. And it can be a really empowering time for a lot of women, because it's a time when they're coming into their own again, and maybe if they've had children, they're children of an age where they're more independent, and they're starting to maybe build their next chapter. And I think for us in the shop particularly, we're trying to sort of say to women, it can be a positive experience. It isn't, the ending of, your youth or, possibilities. It's a new chapter that can be really positive and empowering for them.
So ultimately, the menopause does affect everybody. Whether you're experiencing it yourself at a late stage, an early stage, whether you are the spouse of someone experiencing it, whether you're the child in a family of a mother who has perimenopausal symptoms, or a family member, it's really vital that we do raise that awareness. And I'm not talking just about the onset of symptoms, because there is a bigger picture to be addressed. So once a woman is entering that transition, there's the issues alongside osteoporosis risk, heart disease risk, exacerbation of many other comorbidities if they have those. If there is a woman who's overweight, for instance, or diabetic, or already has a heart disease, or any kind of vascular diseases, the menopause is only going to exacerbate those conditions. So it's a lifelong journey that can affect everybody who cares for a female transitioning through menopause, as well as the women themselves. The increased attention in social media and TV has been amazing for raising awareness of menopause, and it's wonderful to see so many clinical specialists coming forward, and even celebrities who are ultimately our role models, all waving that flag to support and understand. Highlighting how little training healthcare professionals were receiving has made such an impact on how care is now given, because they had very little input for training for menopause. And now the awareness that's being raised is promoting that training. The care given to patients is so much more appropriate and fuller, and there's so much more out there at our fingertips. But it has in the past been portrayed as a condition that requires medication, or is a disease. It's a condition that needs to be fixed. There are equally as many contradictory interventions or negative connotations based on personal experiences. And quite honestly, not everything is actually down to the menopause. And there seems to be an awful lot of, or a huge element of bandwagon jumping, as I call it, to contend with. Where people are just they're experiencing this in their life, so therefore it's going to be menopause, and they've had a bad experience with a GP or with a menopause treatment or something, and therefore everybody's going to hear about it. And it's all very, very, very individual, and unfortunately with social media, that is being blown out of proportion to a degree. But the myth busting and the education and the opening of lines of communication is also positive. And when you look at the media view, the endless list of symptoms is quite a negative mindset. So all of this is now a positive breakthrough. There are a huge number of women that actually go through the menopause and are fairly symptom free, or find that they're not really experiencing too many of the more debilitating symptoms, and that's fantastic. But it's the women who are struggling that need the education and the support and the hand holding, and that's what the media at the moment is doing, and I think it's great.
My reason for doing some of the evenings that I did in the shop was very much to try and put a positive spin on it, because some of the books that I've read about or documentaries that I've seen, it's often the worst case scenarios. For me, that could be negative in a way that you think that's what the menopause is. So if you're a woman who's not even perimenopausal, and I've had some women coming in the shop who are young women who are actually quite anxious about menopause because it just seems like it's this big dark cloud that can span, 10 or more years in kind of like midlife. And I keep sort of saying it doesn't have to be like that, and there are things you can do to help mitigate against that. People are showing that there is life after menopause, and some really great role models for that, because I think it used to be that you were kind of written off a little bit as a middle-aged woman, and now you have got women who are showing that you can be fit and sexy and look great, past menopausal age. What I would like to see more of as well is ways that actually are not necessarily just going down the HRT route, but the kind of mindset, exercise, diet can all actually really have positive impacts for women.
Healthcare professionals everywhere are learning more, are being taught more, and their social media platforms, podcasts, charities, they're all abundantly promoting awareness. There's a lot more research out there, a lot more communication, and within the community and wider networks. And these are the key to understanding and better health outcomes for everyone. So there are an awful lot of, whether it's publications, you just need to turn on the television and there'll be something on it, article newspapers. But the way the algorithms are with social media, the moment you Google anything, it's going to appear on your Facebook and on your Instagram and on, at your bathroom window. You never know where these things are going to suddenly appear. And so automatically you are able to be just a click away from some information that is actually going to be, for the most part, relevant to you. There's still some sifting that needs doing, but in the most part, there's some good, healthy, honest and appropriate advice out there.
I get a lot of women who come into our shop who, by the time they're coming into the shop to ask, have we got anything for menopause, often that means then they're having some menopausal symptoms and they're kind of waving a flag for a need of help. I know a lot of people go to their GP, but I think quite a lot of GPs, the training is still very small on menopause. And for a lot of women, it's either antidepressants or HRT that are kind of routinely prescribed, which is not necessarily what they're looking for. I think now there are a lot of support groups, people like myself, doing the evenings that we've done in our shop here. There are from women who are coming in the shop saying, oh, I run a little support group that's a kind of voluntary thing where we meet, we go for coffee. There's certain cafes that have little mornings where it's kind of menopausal support. I know the yoga studio here, I did a menopause yoga class. It's more and more people now are it's a bit of marketing, I guess. People are kind of seeing, oh, there's a market there. But at the same time, there's a lot of individuals who are going, let's have these talking support networks where people can share what's worked for them, which is kind of what we've done in the shop, really. Looked at it from, like I say, that sort of pronged approach, and then said what we can offer in the shop in terms of dietary changes, supplement changes, and mindset, which I think people have found really empowering.
Try to maintain a non-judgmental stance and encourage. Every woman's experience of the menopause is different. So yes, you can share your experience or the experience of your friend or your neighbour or your work colleague, but this person who's asking you for some support or wants to just stand off may just want that. They may just want somebody to listen. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach that works. It is all individualised, and just be patient. there's so much information at our fingertips, and it's just a question of researching. You can research in order to help your friend or family member or work colleague. You can signpost on if somebody that you know has also gone through a situation that sounds similar. You can share stories, but signposting to appropriate professionals is a start. But just listen, honestly, just a listening ear, and not judging and not coming up with solutions is possibly the best thing you can ever do when somebody just wants to offload.
It depends how severe their symptoms are. I think the thing is to kind of be kind and to be tolerant, because it can easily sometimes be dismissed as like just hormonal and kind of just disregarded. But actually, for women, if they're finding themselves getting anxious, that can be quite a downward spiral. If they are feeling, isolated, a lot of them, it's also that mental adjustment of the fact that actually you've empty nest syndrome, or their life is changing, and there's a lot. I'm very much like, actually it's down to the individual for themselves to kind of find their way out. But it's, if people are being kind of supportive, and sometimes it's just listening. You don't always have to give advice, because sometimes that's not what's needed. It's just a little bit of a listening ear. You can offer advice, but don't be offended if actually it's not taken. And again, like I say, individually, as a woman, it's sometimes going, right, I need to find what works for me here, and kind of have that bit of ownership over having the best, most positive experience of menopause that you can.
The first thing is to monitor symptoms. So either in a diary, on one of many apps that are available, free apps that are available, or reflective writing. Just write everything down every day, or every time you might notice a symptom or something that's a bit different to your norm, and look for patterns. Try to remain present and notice how you feel. So there's sort of like a mindfulness approach to it as well. Look at, how do you feel right now, and write that down, or note it somewhere. What has changed physically, emotionally, or mentally? It's everything. Just a feeling sometimes that you have that you've not noticed before, or experienced such a depth of emotion before. Everything from mood to what aches is relevant to note down. Everything. Even if you're snappy with somebody, or argumentative, or crying, that's quite a big one. Making sure that you have a varied and healthy diet. That's the age old, everything comes down to diet and exercise, because it does. It's what our bodies need, and it's what keeps us healthy. And making sure that you are getting enough cardiovascular and weight-bearing exercise, which is actually vital for all aspects of health, but especially at this time of life. Seeking help from friends, family, healthcare professionals, and work colleagues is a great one. Try to talk to people, ask them if they've noticed anything about you or anything different. And every little measure that you make makes a difference, but do keep it about you. Don't keep it about anybody else. It's all about you. And that's the key, is just make it personal. Understanding your own body and how it ticks is a huge one. Don't put your health solely in the hands of others. Take control of your own health. Don't forget, it's your body. You can't expect another person to know your body and mind better than you do. And you have to take ownership of that, and it will be empowering. But it's absolutely no good expecting your GP to know what's going on in your body. If a doctor takes your blood pressure, what is it? Do you know what your blood pressure is? Do you know what your blood results are? If not, why not? They're your results, they're your numbers. So it's really important to take that across in every area. Look at what food you eat, look at what exercise you're doing, look at yourself, and almost look in the mirror. What do you see? and don't give somebody else the power to know more about you than you know is pretty much, you know, the key message.
Sometimes from the others, it might be signposting them to certain places or people or groups. And I think individually, for myself, in my 30s, right, I kind of made my mind up that I was going to have a really brilliant menopause. I would sail through it. And I kind of did it tongue in cheek. But actually, there's a lot to be said for mindset. And for me, actually, in lots of ways, I have sailed through menopause. I also think that comes down to the fact that I've always exercised and kept fit. There's a lot to be said for healthy living. I've also eaten a predominantly plant-based diet, and actually when we've done research in the shop, what's come about more and more is the benefits of a plant-based diet. So that's increasing nuts, seeds, pulses, reducing meat, if not reducing it entirely. And actually that can have a massive impact. So diet plays a big part. Exercising and keeping fit and healthy, whatever that might be. It could be from doing your kind of CrossFit, HIIT classes, aerobics, to gentle walking, dog walking, a yoga session. And then mindset is massive because, like I say, I kind of jokingly said I'm going to sail through it, but I actually also believed I was going to. And what we found when we've done evenings in the shop, we've always done a little bit of a kind of positive mindfulness meditation. And that's the bit that all the women have absolutely loved and wanted more of. Because actually sometimes just acknowledging where you're at and trying to put positive spins on it, and sort of seeing yourself as empowered, can have a massive impact on just your outlook and how you're feeling. And then also, it is looking, you might need supplements. So I know, like in the shop, we've got soya isoflavins, which are great for boosting, you know, like, or kind of replacing the kind of estrogen. But again, you have to seek, you know, medical advice if that's okay, because people who've had cancer treatments can't take that. Ashwagandha, which is taken for a range of reasons, but people have found that as an adaptogen has kind of helped with their mood. And for some people, HRT is the path that they do need to go down. But I think it's understanding that actually you can take control off a lot of it, you know, if not all of it, and just finding what works for you and asking for help and seeking that advice.
If you think about it, very few women are going to call in sick because of menopause symptoms. So they'll quite often use another ailment and cite something else as to the reason that they're absent. And absences can be regular, and it just adds to their feeling of inadequacy at work. And the menopausal the menopausal employee will feel frustrated and feel inadequate, and the workplace will feel frustrated because of the knock-on effect to the work colleagues, their peers, the management, the tasks that need to be completed. The work doesn't get done, or it costs in having other people come in and do the jobs while that person is off. And because it's such a critical stage in a woman's life, employers who talk openly about menopause with employees and colleagues, ensuring appropriate workplace policies are in place, and simply allowing things like desk changes to cooler parts of the office, fans on desks, encouraging regular breaks, flexible or hybrid working. These all work towards creating a positive working environment for everybody. And because the cost of absences and recruiting alone is eye-watering, these small changes make such a difference to both the employee and the employer. And quite frankly, you'll get more out of your employee if you're supportive, and your employee will want to do more because you are a supportive employer. So it's win-win, and it can only be lose-lose, if you like, with a non-supportive environment, or non-communicative, shall we say.
Going on the women we've been talking to in the evenings that we've held, or the customers who come into the shop, for some of them things like hot sweats can be really quite debilitating for them and quite embarrassing, especially if they're doing something public facing, or like one lady was telling me she's got quite a high powered job in a meeting with a lot of men where suddenly she could feel herself starting to have a hot flush. Then she was getting embarrassed about the hot flush. Then her anxiety started to peak with that. She was getting brain fog. And actually, what was hard for her is she's a woman in actually quite a male-dominated industry, not wanting to kind of lose face, not wanting for them to think any less of her as a colleague. So sometimes just having that understanding that she's still a capable woman in her role, but it's an actual physical medical condition that she's going through. So having maybe just that degree of tolerance or understanding, and not that kind of dismissiveness that I think a lot of women have experienced in the workplace when it comes to how she's having a period, or those kind of hormonal issues, that can belittle women and kind of stop them progressing with their careers. So I think in the workplace, for a lot of women, they're really still trying to hold their own in a male work environment. A lot of them have said, had it been that men were going through these issues, it would be a very different work environment. So it's just building up that understanding, that tolerance, the language that's used. And I know now they're talking about having menopause breaks, aren't they, for career, like in career, where you can kind of almost like have some time off due to menopausal symptoms. But also, I think within the workplace, sometimes just having support networks, or some of the women here were saying they've got like wellbeing sessions or just little group sessions, WhatsApp groups where people just don't feel on their own and feel supported and feel they've got people who actually are listening to them and understanding them and recognising menopause for what it actually is.
They're reasonable. They're little things that employers can do. And it's very difficult because when you're looking at a corporate environment, it feels like a huge, sort of quite an onerous task to take on, to manage a large group of menopausal women. But we're looking at keeping windows open, making sure there's plenty of ventilation in case they get hot sweats, making sure there's changing facilities so that they can actually change clothes if they feel they need to. Flexible working, hybrid working, so that if, say, today you're having you really didn't sleep very well, you've been having flushes and a restless night's sleep, and actually your body aches, but you're capable of doing your job, let them work from home if it's possible. Or come in late, look at changing. What are worse times of day than others? Is it better that they come into the office later and work later, or come in early because they've been up half the night and leave early? Desk fans, regular breaks, making sure there's facilities where there's places to eat, and that all of these should be standard in offices anyway, but allowing that individual to utilise them. We're all the same when we get into work. So I'm just going to finish this before lunch. I'm just going to finish this before I get a coffee. I'm just going to do this before I go and use the toilet. Well, no, let it be known that actually the priority is the individual. And when they feel listened to, and if you're communicating and you're asking how they are and you're understanding, and if they're off sick, well, why are they off sick? Is there something that you can be doing differently in order to assist them to remain in the workplace? Because actually that will help your business, but it will also help your employee feel worthy, and it will lift self-esteem. It will make them feel that they're valued, that they're important, that they're worth your time and effort, and therefore they have something to bring to the table. So the size of the business that you work for should be irrelevant. The same adjustments should be made regardless of whether you're a huge corporation or a small family-run business. There should be no difference between that. However, the differences come when you don't have an office-based role, when you are community-based. And now if you think about the NHS, for instance, the majority is something like 70% of the NHS is female. The employees are female. Now that's huge. And so therefore, with the NHS, it's ward-based or it's community-based, so anybody driving in cars or on their feet all day, whether you're a hairdresser, whether you're a healthcare assistant, a waitress, a nurse, whoever you are, if you're on your feet all day, there has to be the provision for breaks. Without a shadow of a doubt, acknowledging that there may be a frequency of going to the toilet. There may be that the joints are aching, so they'll need some sort of provision for sitting down. They may feel wearier or more tearful. Everything, no matter what environment, it still needs to be addressed. So perhaps if they are community-based and driving around a lot, are there touchdown bases that they can just go and do some paperwork in, or could they do split shifts, starting early, finishing at lunchtime, taking a few hours off, then coming back in later and working through? They could be working across 7 days instead of 5. It may even, in some cases, be better to have longer days in an environment, then you have more days off outside of that. So your 37-hour week, for instance, might be 3 or 4 long days, and then you have sort of 1 or 2 extra days off away outside of the weekend. Lots of things.
So again, obviously different work environments will need different practices. So my previous career, I was a primary school teacher. So actually when you're standing in front of a class of children, you can't kind of sometimes just have a bit of time out. But it might well be that in an environment like that, just, being able to say to other colleagues, today I've got a bit of brain fog, or if there are, like I say, just being able to sort of chat things through and it being talked about. I know for me personally as a teacher, it was predominantly quite a female environment, and it was only in sort of the latter years of my teaching career that people were starting to talk about menopause, at coffee breaks and lunchtime, and little techniques that they would have. Like one of the teachers, I remember, often used to wear a scarf, but that was because she could feel her neck starting to go red and blotchy, so the scarf was a little bit of a defence for her. But just having things like, resources, so that if brain fog's an issue, you kind of go, well, okay, here's ways of note-taking or prompts. But also just being able to, sometimes I think for a lot of women, being able just to talk about it, laugh about it, joke about it is a bit of a release, rather than feeling like you've got to kind of keep just putting up with it and pushing through it. I know other women here who come into the shop will say, especially now working from home, which a lot of them are doing since COVID, that's made it a lot easier for them, because they're able just to take bits of time out. Another symptom a lot of women suffer with is really like quite chronic fatigue. So again, sometimes maybe work hours or patterns, so that they can maybe have a bit more flexible working. So if there are days when they are really kind of quite debilitated with fatigue, they can kind of work the morning and do a bit of flexi hours. So I guess it depends on the environment, but there should always be some options available, which I guess is to be negotiated with the workplace. The fact actually that we've got menopause now is because we're living longer, and it used to be, something that women died often before they were menopausal, or, whilst menopausal, which is why it wasn't known about so much. So actually it's a kind of celebration of getting to where you're at. And I think to start to see it, it can be a time of reclaiming who you are, changing a little bit about how you see yourself. A lot of women, I think, are starting to things that used to be the things that they worried about, what people thought about them, or how they'd be perceived or how they look, suddenly there's an element of just owning it and not being so bothered, and that can be really empowering. And using it as a time to kind of bit of self-care, looking after yourself, and actually getting yourself fit and well for the next, years to come, and owning it really. So to be positive about it, there is help out there. There are things you can do to make it better, and it does eventually pass.
I think that one of the important factors is to make sure that when you are researching, and research is so important, doesn't matter what somebody else has told you or what their experience is and what they think you should use or do or say. Do your own research. But when you do, make sure it is evidence-based. And if you are not sure where that information has come from, ask a healthcare professional. Read the books and the journals that are based on facts as opposed to fiction. And just understand what is, again, going on in your body and that is relevant to you. But you can find so much bad press by Googling one word, and it isn't always necessarily what you're looking for. And there can be a lot of scaremongering as well. So it's really about making sure that you are getting the right advice and using reputable websites, reputable social media followers, and people you're following rather, and that you are getting the right information.